welcome to this episode of the Future of Money podcast. In this special series focused on the future of crypto compliance powered by ACX Compliance. Today, my guest is Henri Redbord, the Global Head of Policy and Government Affairs at TRM Labs. Henri spent previously many years at the Department of Treasury and the DOJ, covering a vast range of topics on financial crime compliance. In this episode, we're really going to go level deep on topics like what's happening with banks and transaction monitoring, what's happening on the transaction monitoring tools and the landscape, but also some of the new initiatives like the Beacon Network, and in particular focus on what's happening with the professional money laundering networks. Henri, welcome to this special series on the future of crypto compliance.
Henri, thank you so much for having me. It struck me, when we started talking today, that the last time we had a conversation was a couple of years ago at Token 2049, and my goodness, how has the world changed since then?
Oh, a lot of change. Well, actually, let's start with that, Henri. We're right now sitting in Washington, D.C., literally in a hotel lobby to record this, and I know you spent a lot of time, you testified in front of various government agencies. Yesterday, I was walking in front of the World Bank, the IMF offices, and thinking how much the policy approach to crypto and also crypto compliance has changed in literally the last year.
Really, in the last 6 months, and it's been extraordinary. I think that when I've thought about the crypto policy landscape over the last 5 years since I've been at TRM, it's always been about Singapore and Dubai and Japan and even Europe with MiCA. And finally, I think in the last 6 months, we're talking about the US first in many of these conversations. We now have crypto legislation in the United States that passed this summer, the Genius Act, which provides a framework for stablecoins. We're talking about market structure, what that looks like, who's going to regulate the space now. The White House put out a 163-page report this summer, probably the most detailed report the US government has ever put out, laying out market structure, stablecoins, 20 pages on illicit finance. So I think what we're finally seeing, taxation, what we're finally seeing is the conversation really mature. Look, I do think it's always important to point out that we're still behind Singapore and Europe and Dubai and others who have frameworks in place, but it's coming. And I think the momentum is what people are feeling like is pushing us ahead, and it may ultimately do that. But right now, it's just critical that the conversations are happening. And I'd say, hopefully, by the end of the year, we'll have market structure legislation in place. Ultimately, we'll see how the politics of that work out. But maybe even more importantly, the White House has instructed regulators, and we can talk more about this, the SEC, the CFTC, Treasury, to work together even without Congress, right, without legislation to provide legal clarity to the space, which I think is something that we're starting to see in earnest.
I mean, I read the big chunks of the 160-page document from the White House. I was very, very impressed. I mean, the level of technical detail they go through, they're not afraid of addressing many topics on DeFi and illicit finance. I was very, very impressed, actually. It's probably the most sophisticated government-issued document that I've seen in a long time. And obviously, you mentioned here, the role between the SEC, the CFTC, Treasury. You spent years at the DOJ, at Treasury. Do you believe these organizations will be able to get up to speed quickly to deal with the potential volumes we'll see, both with Genius, with market structure, and all the activity we'll see afterwards?
It's a great question, and I would say yes is sort of my short answer. I think the longer answer is, I think something the crypto industry has not understood over the last bunch of years is really the level of deep subject matter expertise that exists within these agencies.
Absolutely.
When I was at Treasury, I'll tell you, at FinCEN, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit, OFAC, TFFC, which is the policy shop on illicit finance, on the compliance issues that you focus on, there is deep subject matter expertise from career civil servants in these places who are ready to really implement crypto policy, crypto legislation. Same at this SEC. And that's always been true, the CFTC. I think the challenge is resourcing. These organizations, these agencies have been woefully under-resourced for years, and now you see, Treasury right now is grappling with Genius Act implementation. There's an RFI, a request for information response, that the entire crypto industry is responding to, TRM included, next month. Now the question becomes, is the resourcing there? So I think that the longer answer is the expertise is absolutely there. The resourcing, I think, is a challenge.
Interesting. Let's talk about resourcing. One of the, for sure, most direct consequences, or positive actually consequences of the Genius Act will be all these banks will need to accept stablecoins in the next 3 years, right? Whether they like it or not. They may not need to learn about Bitcoin, but definitely they need to understand stablecoins. You spend also a lot of time with the banks. How are you seeing the level of understanding, awareness, and readiness of the, let's say, U.S. banking landscape when it comes to stablecoins, and particularly on the topic of transaction monitoring and crypto compliance?
This is why you're so sharp, because I think it's like a lot of people are focusing on the legislation and the policy making right now, and that's absolutely right in the U.S. But to me, the bigger story is actually institutional adoption and the way the larger financial institutions are really getting deep in the space. And it was happening at the end of the Biden administration with ETF approved, Bitcoin ETF approvals. We're seeing Fidelity, we're seeing BlackRock. But I would say over the last 6 months, it's become even more interesting. The conversations that we're having more and more are with large financial institutions and down to the mid-size. And even I was at ACAMS in Vegas this week, and we're talking about smaller community banks that are saying, hey, we have clients who are asking for custody, clients that are asking for access to digital assets through our platforms. So I would say that from a compliance perspective, we have been seeing banks think about what crypto compliance could look like for a while, transaction monitoring, what custody solutions could look like. And I think now we're seeing them really start to build out these functions and are looking for tools, are looking for expertise. So I think it's really exciting. But to me, I've always believed if we're going to really want to take this space further and see that real adoption happen, people use banks. They're used to using their banks. Absolutely. They need access through their traditional financial institutions.
But what are you finding is the biggest challenge, let's say when you're talking to these banks? I know it's very early days, right? Is it the resourcing, the training? Are the people there happy to get trained? Is there a budget for more headcount? Because obviously it's a different skill set when you're doing crypto compliance on, let's say, reviewing transaction monitoring alerts compared to just looking at world check KYC checks that are popping up.
Sure. What I'm hearing is that a lot of these functions were marginalized, might not be the right word, but they were small and didn't have a ton of resources. And just in the last 6 months, I think Genius, I think market structure, some of the clarity that's coming out from a regulatory perspective, direct from regulators, is now starting to see the C-suite of these large banks say, hey, what are we doing on this? And then it's like, okay, well, now we're going to get resourced. Now we're going to start moving much more quickly. I would say from a pure compliance perspective, these banks are some of the most conservative institutions in the world. And compliance can become a really, really key part of offering crypto assets to customers, custody, even banking crypto businesses. So I would say that yes, we're in I see a little bit more of a hurry up. I'm getting calls that say, hey, can you talk today? Can you talk tomorrow about tooling, about training, in a way that we just weren't seeing in this sort of, we're experimenting, we're trying to figure it out, that we've seen over the last couple of years. But it's been an ebb and flow. 2 years ago, I shouldn't say 2 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, I saw a lot of financial institutions start to show interest. Then FTX happened, and that changed dramatically. But I think now it's always been about clarity and rules of the road. Crypto businesses are willing to experiment, maybe without true clarity, without rules. Banks are not going to drive without a speed limit, and I think that's really what we're experiencing right now with Genius and market structure and some of the regulatory guidance that's come out.
Talking about guidance, as we were recording this, there was a New York Department of Financial Services issued guidance, a couple days ago, recommending the banks implement transaction monitoring tools. Were you surprised of that? I didn't expect to see that guidance come so quickly.
It was really interesting. About 2 years ago, DFS put out similar guidance on blockchain analytics for crypto firms, but it really goes exactly to what we're talking about. And now DFS is looking at the landscape of their regulated entities, and they're saying it's not just pure crypto firms, but it's also financial institutions that are now starting to offer assets, starting to offer custody. One thing I've always said about DFS, regardless of what people think about BitLicense or other types of regimes, I've always said they are the very best at providing clear, concise guidance to their regulated entities.
Interesting.
And this was the same thing. It was 3-4 paragraph letter, usually it's 30, 40 pages of guidance and footnotes. And I think it's just they put out really clear guidance to their regulated entities, and it makes sense, right? We have the ability to track and trace cryptocurrency, to do transaction monitoring, to do wallet screening in a way that you can't do it in traditional finance, right? Every transaction is recorded on a mutable public ledger. This goes to the heart of the work that you do and the evangelizing that you do for compliance. And DFS is just saying hey, take advantage of blockchain technology in
is
order to
available.
do this better that's available to you. So I was obviously very excited about it.
Yeah, it's great news for transaction monitoring tools.
It was a love
like
letter.
TRM. Hey everyone, just want to take a couple seconds of your time to thank the sponsor that made this show possible, ACX Compliance, the world's largest crypto specialized compliance managed services provider. ACX Compliance is your one-stop shop for all your crypto compliance needs, from crypto transaction monitoring and SAR investigations to regulatory licensing and remediations. 100% of their staff are advanced crypto trained. 100% of their staff are trained on all the major crypto compliance tools from KYC to transaction monitoring. They're 100% focused on the crypto industry and only work with crypto clients, so they're specialized and aware of the latest practical trends we're seeing. In addition, 100% of their staff are full-time employees. They don't have contractors and they don't even allow remote work. And they have all the relevant ISO and security certifications to ensure the level of compliance security the crypto industry needs and deserves. They already provide services to some of the world's largest crypto exchanges, custodians, and crypto platforms. If you're looking at scaling your compliance operations or saving on costs, think about ACX Compliance. acxcompliance.com, acxcompliance.com. Now, back to our show. But actually, on that front, do you believe there are too many tools right now in the market? If I look at this TRM, what you're doing, the chain analysis, the elliptics, the Merkles, the crystals, and the list goes on and on. And obviously there's been some, let's say, changes in some of the solutions. CipherTrace, MasterCard, there's a whole story there as well. Do you believe there are too many tools right now in the market, or we'll see each firm focus on certain niche areas, or there'll be consolidation?
Yeah, I don't think there are too many tools in the market. I think, when you look out at the greenfield opportunities in this space, to me, we haven't even gotten to payments, right? We're talking about stablecoins at scale, but we're still not seeing sort of large large retailers start to offer crypto assets, start to take crypto assets as payment. But we're going to see that happen with Amazon. We're going to see that happen with Walmart. We're going to see that happen with these large businesses. There's going to be more and more need for these types of solutions. I would say, quite frankly, there are really only a couple that have traction in the market today, in my mind, the way I sort of think about it, when I look at sort of the competitive landscape. And when I think about the greenfield opportunities and how big ultimately the crypto ecosystem is going to grow. This has nothing to do with blockchain analytics. Crypto is going to get so big from a law enforcement perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and most importantly, from a private sector retail payments perspective, that there's going to be a need for all kinds of different solutions.
And I think you're right. I mean, we often are just focused on the crypto side, but this ecosystem can really explode in the next couple of years.
The ecosystem is really going to grow. And I think we always think about, like, hey, when we're ever in a certain space, and you and I are in this space, we're thinking about, who are the competitors? Well, think about other spaces and how many more competitors there are in those spaces.
Absolutely. I think that's something very important. So I want to focus now on a couple of new initiatives that I've seen in the market I think are very interesting. One of them, and I want to talk about professional networks of money laundering, but before that, also, can you share more with us? There's been one initiative I know that TRM was involved in recently with the Beacon Network. Can you share, for the benefit of our compliance audience, what is the Beacon Network? How does it work? And maybe what problem it's trying to solve in practice?
No, thank you. It's awesome, and probably the thing I'm most excited about right now in a long time. So about 3 weeks ago, TRM announced the Beacon Network. And essentially what we did is we looked around the ecosystem and we brought together compliant players, those who wanted to stop bad actors, those who want to be involved in the solution as opposed to the problem. So we started with Coinbase and Binance, right? Large, important global exchanges, and then reached out to Kraken and OKX and HTX and Poloniex, Ripple, blockchain.com, crypto.com. And then we looked around and said, all right, where else are we seeing crypto activity? So we went to fintechs like PayPal and Stripe and Robinhood. We went to global law enforcement agencies, really across the world, in the US and globally. And we said, how can we stop bad actors from off-ramping proceeds of crime? Beacon today accounts for about 75% of all transaction volume in crypto. And what it is functionally, how this works, is law enforcement investigators send out alerts. Beacon, imagine lighthouses sending out a beacon, an alert to crypto exchanges saying, hey, funds are moving, these illicit proceeds are moving. And those exchanges, Binance, Coinbase, Kraken, crypto.com, get an alert and they're able to stop and ultimately work with law enforcement to
Great.
seize those funds.
Yeah.
This is all about interdiction. This isn't just compliance.
Yeah.
And what really, you asked earlier when we were speaking before this, what was the impetus behind this? Why did you guys decide to kind of really bring the whole ecosystem together? And look, we've seen about 50 billion in scams and fraud since 2023. And that number is woefully underreported.
Yeah.
I would say that the conventional wisdom talks about 15% of victims report.
Absolutely.
So that means that number is probably 85% larger. That's a real problem. And I love this space. At TRM, we love this space. And we know the ecosystem wants to be the solution, that we don't need overregulation. We need to come together to stop bad actors. And that's really the impetus behind this. If there was one thing that really sort of like focused us and made this happen, it was probably the Bybit hack.
Yeah.
We said, hey, there is not a world in which North Korea should be able to steal $1.5 billion from this space and off-ramp those funds. So let's build a perimeter around the crypto ecosystem to not allow them to do this.
So I want to come back to the Bybit hack in a second. Just to clarify, with the Beacon network, basically any of the participants can basically send a beacon if you want, say, okay, this transaction, this happened, and everybody will be notified, basically.
That's exactly right. I mean, we have this network of flaggers, right? And they are highly trained. Not every law enforcement user of TRM is a flagger. But we have this trusted network of flaggers. They flag an address, and that alert goes out to the exchanges so they can cut off this perimeter, so they can interdict those funds. One of the coolest things about Beacon is it's really the first time we've also leveraged private sector investigators. Folks like Zach XBT, who's famously, Twitter crypto sleuth, right?
Never gives interviews though, so I try to get him on the show, but
absolutely. I think you'd probably have to do the voice thing. But so Zach, Zero Shadow, SEAL Team. We have this just incredible network of private sector investigators also, which really speaks to, and I've been talking to policymakers on Capitol Hill about this. It's like, hey, if you look at the market structure discussion drafts from the US Senate, there is a recommendation for essentially public-private partnership that is exactly what Beacon built today.
Absolutely.
So this is really the industry coming together and saying, hey, we're overwhelmingly lawful, overwhelmingly compliant. We want to stop bad actors, right? I mean, for folks like me who spent my career in sort of national security space, I deeply care about stopping bad actors globally. But I know everyone in crypto cares about the ecosystem and protecting it. And I think that's really what Beacon is about.
But to focus on this, right? I mean, let's use the Bybit hack as an example. I was pleasantly surprised and proud to see how the community got together actually just to address the funds that when they were leaking out of Bybit, when they were being hacked out of Bybit. But a lot of the money got laundered via the different DeFi exchanges that we've seen. And obviously, these DeFi exchanges were not cooperating at all at the time. Do you believe when you see the weak point right now in the ecosystem, and you think it's more DeFi? Is it the professional money laundering networks? Like, let's look at the Bybit hack, for example. Do you believe the Beacon network could have probably stopped the flow of funds at the centralized exchanges, but could have done anything on the DeFi side?
No, it's an amazing question, and it's really cool for you to ask it in this context. So one thing I forgot to mention about Beacon is we also have a network of DeFi players, DeFi protocols, who are members of Beacon today. Good. So RhinoFi, which is a bridge, 1inch, which is a DeFi protocol, and we're really building out that network. Now it's different, right? If you're a decentralized service, you're not able to work with law enforcement to seize funds. But what you can do is use TRM to get an alert to block funds that are about to hit your platform. And that's what 1inch is doing, and that's what RhinoFi is doing. So for example, if Bybit hacked funds are heading towards RhinoFi bridge, they are able to block those funds from going over or into their service. And that's absolutely critical. And now, what do we do next? What we do next is we follow those funds to the next DeFi service where those funds are going. We alert that service, hopefully bring that person, that service or that onto Beacon, and then ultimately we're able to even strengthen that perimeter. So when you ask about sort of where are the weak points, it's a great question. Today we see, if you think about the stages of money laundering, today we see layering take place within the DeFi protocols, right? You're moving funds around, but the reality is you still can't use them for anything. So where we continue to see those weak points are the on and off ramps. And that's what we really are focused on with Beacon, is trying to stop those. And where do we see that? We see them in OTC brokers in places like China and elsewhere, and these professional money laundering networks that you and I talked about.
Just want to take a couple seconds to thank our sponsor for today, ACX Compliance, the world's largest crypto specialized compliance services firm. If you are looking to moving to the UAE and getting a VAR license or an ADGM license, think about ACX Compliance. They provide the full one-stop shop support from incorporating your company and getting your visas to getting your VAR application and ongoing post-licensing support. If you're thinking about the UAE, think about ACX Compliance, acxcompliance.com. Now back to the show. So let's focus on that. I mean, the benefit of this show, we can go a level deeper, with a lot of the listeners are interested in compliance or the compliance professionals. So let's talk about the OTC desk first, and then also let's call it the professional networks, and especially what's happening in China, which I find, by the way, is an elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it. We're in DC right now.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, nobody wants to talk about the China impact on crypto. So let's talk about the OTC desk, right? What do you think is the weak point there? Is it happening a lot in OTC desk in Russia at that Federation Tower building in Moscow? Or are you seeing a lot of lax compliance process, procedures, and implementation at the various OTC desks that we have globally now?
Sure, both, right? And I think that when you talk about Beacon, I kind of described that 75 to 80% of all transaction volume of crypto is occurring within those large exchanges that are members today, and we want to build out Beacon in order to get even more. So, but when I think about where those weak spots, they're exactly where you're talking about, where what I would call the non-compliant VASP or non-compliant crypto exchange ecosystem. And you mentioned that tower in Russia. To me, that's where we should be focusing when we're talking about global enforcement, right? Not just U.S. Treasury, not just OFAC, but globally. We've seen Europe issue sanctions as well on places like Garantex, and when I look back, this is not politics. This is previous administration stuff in the U.S., but it's SUEX, ChatEx, Garantex, Bitslato, right? It's a real focus on going after the non-compliant ecosystem, buy cash. And I think that's where we need to really focus our attention. That's where the gaps are. But there's a lot less liquidity in those places. So when you talk about the OTC network of OTC brokers, inevitably, this is sort of like crypto hawalas, right? Inevitably, you're going to see it a lot easier. Some of these are in face-to-face transactions. It's just a lot harder to monitor. But to me, what we need to do is we need to build out the compliant ecosystem with things like Beacon and isolate those guys and then ultimately go after them. But it's going to require a lot more than blockchain analytics tools, right? I try to explain to folks that we're not a silver bullet. I hear some of our competitors talk about tools as a silver bullet, and to me, it's a whole of government and really global approach. It's getting really leaning into FATF standards, ensuring those exist globally. It is using offensive cyber tools against bad actors. It's using law enforcement tools globally against bad actors. It's using sanctions. So it's really a whole of government approach. But my view is strengthen the compliant ecosystem and go after the non-compliant ecosystem.
For example, a lot of the names you mentioned, I mean, what I find amazing in this space is there's literally that one tower in Moscow where all these firms are. And I mean, you spent a lot of years in government, right? I mean, how complicated is it? And maybe it's a stupid question, but for example, for us to try to stop, literally they're physically there, right? There's obviously you need collaboration, let's say in that example with the Russian law enforcement, right? Because obviously they know this is happening as well.
Correct.
What is the biggest level of difficulty? Is it government G2G collaboration that is obviously missing here on crypto, or what is the challenge?
No, it's a great question. I think the reality is that where this is really happening are places like China, Russia, Iran, and elsewhere where the U.S., Southeast Asia, where the U.S. might not have as strong. But I talk all the time about, diplomacy. I mean, to me, as we're talking about tariffs with China and there's negotiation going on, getting law enforcement involved with, policing, Chinese law enforcement with policing the networks, Chinese gangs and others who are triads, who are deeply, deeply involved with these Chinese money laundering networks, it's going to require. So from a U.S. perspective, from a global perspective, it's hey, how can we leverage diplomacy? How can we put pressure on Chinese banks to get them to stop, laundering funds for ultimately laundering funds?
Can you share more about that? I mean, can you share more about the role of these professional money laundering? You mentioned triads in China, because I think it's a topic that is not talked a lot, and not many people know about it. Actually, definitely in the West.
Sure. What's really interesting is what we're seeing, and we can make on-chain connections to this. Actually, what we're seeing is you think about these biggest threats that we've already talked about today. Cartels. We talked about pig butchering networks. We talked about North Korea hacks. They're all using professional money launderers to ultimately move the funds. And what's interesting is like even on chain after the Bybit hack, you saw the funds pretty much within 72 hours move from Bitcoin to Ethereum, which is from Ethereum to Bitcoin, which we've never seen funds move faster. But really over the last, well, now it's been probably 9 months or so, little less than that, 8 months. We're now it's disparate laundering. And what's very clear is that there are different networks, different folks are moving funds around. So I think what we're seeing in all of these different instances is these professional money laundering networks used, and they're very, very effective. They also have more liquidity than they've ever had before. So they are, what you do is it's almost think of, North Korea was a criminal state and laundering money way before crypto was in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was a prosecutor, it was maybe the early days of Bitcoin laundering. There was none of the cyber attacks, but we were dealing with, fake $100 bills, right? Counterfeit $100 bills out of North Korea. We were dealing with counterfeit tobacco out of North Korea. All kinds of issues. And North Korea has figured out how to use professional money laundering networks globally. The Bank of Bangladesh heist, Sony Pictures. They were laundering funds through casinos in Macau long before crypto was a thing.
Exactly.
So they have access to these laundering networks that are now using cryptocurrency more and more, stablecoins in particular.
And the layering that these organizations are doing are basically across all different business lines and everything. I mean, we see it from scams to probably, restaurants. I mean, these professional money laundering networks, they're using, they have the existing businesses and channels to launder basically, and crypto is just one other vertical.
That's exactly right. Crypto is obviously the promise of cryptocurrency, and why I think you and I are so passionate about the technology is its cross-border value transfer at the speed of the internet. We can now move larger amounts of funds faster cross-border for remittances, for humanitarian aid, for payments, right? We talked about stablecoins. But bad guys love that too.
No, exactly.
They can now move funds faster and in larger amounts than ever before. And that's why we're seeing these traditional money launderers or these networks look to cryptocurrency as opposed to, it's one thing to trade out cash, at a kiosk. Now we're seeing the movement of stablecoins in the same way.
The problem is I can see how you can go launder maybe $10,000 at a kiosk and OTC in person in Moscow or whatever you want to do it, but laundering like millions of dollars is obviously way more difficult. But Henri, for decades, law enforcement and various agencies around the world have tried to crack down on these, let's call them, what they're calling professional money laundering networks, without much success. I mean, it's always a cat and mouse game, right? Are we going to be able to succeed now when we failed for decades?
Sure.
I'm not sure.
No. I think the reality is that we're never going to take these networks down, and we're never going to stop money laundering, right? I think that whenever I hear that from a compliance talk or something, I use the term mitigate a lot. I think we need to mitigate these risks. Risk will always be there. Not to be glib, but we don't want a financial system where bad guys don't want to engage. That means there's not enough
liquidity.
There's not enough liquidity. There's not enough success there.
And
I think the fact that we're seeing these actors move to crypto means that bad guys always go where the money is. That's why we're seeing these, wrench attacks, these physical attacks now, because people have become rich in crypto. The financial system is working. That's why we're seeing these money launderers use it. That's why we're seeing this type of activity. So I think the reality is that we're going to see more and more of this as the ecosystem grows, but hopefully it will remain a relatively small percentage of overall activity.
Are you impressed by the crypto hacking efforts of North Korea and some of the stuff they've done recently? Are you even surprised seeing what they're doing?
I mean, not surprised at the latest stuff just because they've been so good at this now for so long. But in terms of being impressed, absolutely. I mean, I think what North Korea has done is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, this is a banana republic with absolutely no economy whatsoever. And they have somehow gotten into the world of Russia and China and Iran when we're talking about adversaries in the world. And it's literally because they have understood that you don't need to fight kinetically, that you can fight in the digital landscape, that wars can be now fought in cyberspace and across blockchains. And North Korea understands that you just need a cadre of really, really good cyber experts, and they have raised them from children, right? This is Russian gymnasts. I mean, they identify great STEM, math, science students at an early age. They put them in special schools. They give them access to the internet and to computers. And they give them an opportunity to travel abroad to places like China and ultimately to learn to compete on some of these, math and science. It's absolutely. I know you're a big podcast guy. You have the greatest podcast ever. Lazarus Heist goes into great depth. The BBC podcast on a lot of this stuff. It's really extraordinary. And it's funny, like a lot of the cases on Lazarus Heist are cases that I worked on at the U.S. Attorney's Office with people like Nick Carlson and Chris Chinchesky. But it tells the really wonderful story of how this has been built. So yes, you can hear in my voice like I'm absolutely impressed. But I also think there's a lot more we can do to stop them.
I want to talk about the policy, but quickly I want to also address on pig butchering scams. I mean, it's been, even on my side, there's fake Henris that pop up every week on various social media channels. And I hear so many sad stories every week of pig butchering scams. Are you seeing improvements in that space, or you think, unfortunately, this is something that's going to take place for a while?
It's really hard. It's really, really hard. And I've often said we're not going to trace our way out of this. This is not a compliance issue. This is ultimately an education issue. And these bad actors are only getting better. We haven't even gotten to AI yet. But AI is supercharging fraud and scam campaigns. We now see deepfake technology used. I'm waiting to see Henri, AI Henri. But truly, you're seeing Elon Musk and other celebrities used in these deepfake scams. We saw about a 500% increase this year in AI-generated fraud. That is
tell me more about that.
extraordinary.
How are you seeing that? Like, for example, give me examples of how that's happening.
What you're seeing is bad actors, these scammers, fraudsters, really leveraging AI. And just think about just a couple years ago, or even probably just a couple months ago, you'd get these phishing emails, you'd get these texts. It was broken English.
Nigerian prince type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, would some people be fooled by it? But most people wouldn't be, right? Now it's highly targeted, right? It might come from your boss or from your child. You might get a phone call from the hospital now saying, hey, with your child's voice saying, I'm in the hospital, can you send money? We're seeing, deepfake, you're seeing videos of people's CEO, calling them and saying, hey, can you send funds to this address? We got to have this closed by the end of the day. So we're seeing bad actors use AI to really supercharge their scam activity. Famously, and there's people like Erin West in this space who have really shined a light on it. And are
She's going to come on the show as well.
She absolutely should. She's done TRM talks with me. We have a really robust partnership at TRM with Operation Shamrock, and the work that Erin does through a website that we run called Chain Abuse, which is a reporting database for scams and fraud. But the reality is that human trafficking is a huge piece of this, right? A lot of these scammers, if you will, are also victims. They're also trafficked. But the reality is there's a lot of friction in human trafficking, as you know.
Of course.
Maybe bad actors are going to eliminate that and use AI agents, right, as scammers, which is going to absolutely continue to supercharge this type of activity. So, really watching AI very, very closely when it comes to crime, but also at TRM, super focused on building tools that use AI, that leverage AI in order to combat AI-related crime. I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee this summer on the first ever hearing on AI crime. And that's really the conversation. It's all right, here are the crime typologies, but here how we're building tools for law enforcement to stop them.
One last topic, Ari, on the policy side on AI, right? So I've been obviously there's a lot we can do now, even on crypto compliance, on transaction monitoring, using AI. There's obviously bad guys are using it, but the good guys as well, there's a lot of ways to reduce compliance costs, use it. There's a lot of work that can be done using AI. I've been actually very surprised to see the reluctance on the part of regulators. They still want humans to be there to make a decision. Although, especially for level 1 stuff, you could probably use AI for a lot of the stuff. What's your view on the use of AI in crypto compliance? And do you believe it's going to take longer than what we may see the use of AI in other day-to-day activities?
Yeah, I think it's the most interesting question the space is facing right now. And I'm sure you would agree with this. I've never seen anything move more quickly in my lifetime than AI. When you talk about these tools, we're talking about days, not weeks, not months, in terms of them getting significantly better. I've never, in the last 6 months, I've never seen anything. It's a technology revolution in a way that we've never seen it before. And I think it's absolutely critical that compliance teams are leveraging these tools, that regulators are leveraging these tools, that law enforcement is leveraging these tools. I think that the challenge that these are very conservative institutions.
Of course, yeah.
And I think that's one thing that's always been cool about crypto. When you talk about people in crypto compliance, they're already leveraging AI tools from a compliance perspective in a pretty meaningful way. Probably less so at banks that are looking for guidance from their regulators on this stuff. But I would say that, look, one of the things I love about the U.S. democracy is the focus on the states. We talked about DFS earlier. California, I think, is doing some really cool stuff there too. And a lot of those regulators are starting to use AI in really meaningful ways that I'm seeing in a way that maybe the federal government is sort of just getting around to. But we'll see. But like, Henri, it is so early when you think about this stuff, and we're talking about really conservative institutions. But to me, bad actors are supercharging. They're removing human bottlenecks from crime. I mean, that is absolutely wild. Compliance professionals need to move as fast. And the only way to do that is really, really leveraging AI. I think this is going to be the question for the rest of our lifetime.
Well, what is the use case you're most excited with AI in crypto compliance? Because I agree with you, like we still have, regulators have still issues on data security, cybersecurity, all the topics that we know. But what is the main use case you think on crypto compliance for crypto compliance professionals that we can use AI to reduce headcount, cost, or even accelerate things?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, why blockchain technology, why what we do at TRM is so extraordinary, and why, frankly, I am in this space, is we have the largest database of fraud and financial crime in human history. It's just the nature of public blockchains, right, where every transaction is logged and immutable. And what AI is all about is taking data and finding key insights, finding that needle in a haystack, right? For years in the US, it's about siloed SARs, right? You get a SAR that goes directly from the bank to the regulator, no one else sees it. In crypto, we can do so much better. When I was in AUSA in DC, I was a member of this SAR task force, and it was literally looking through paper to try to figure out like where the better cases would be. You put an AI agent on top of a SAR database, or using AI in TRM's tool to build out networks of illicit activity. We could do things so much better and so much faster. And I really do believe that like this convergence of AI and blockchain technology is the future of compliance.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to be very, very exciting. There'll be entire careers built on that. Ari, as we close the interview, I want to have my fast fire round of questions. I'm going to go through it. I normally have my bell, but I don't have it with me today in DC. But when I go through that on it, I'm going to give you quick questions and I want 1 or 2 word answers. You ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. What's the one thing that's exciting you the most about the world of crypto now?
Beacon Network.
Wow, here. What's keeping you up at night from a risk perspective when it comes to crypto?
I would say nation state actors.
Yeah, very good one. If you could go back to public service today, either DOJ, Treasury, or any other government body, what's the one role you would love to do?
John Hurley, who's the Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, I told him this recently, has the best job in the US government, leveraging the tools of OFAC, FinCEN, having the policy experts at TFFC. I worked for a woman named Sigal Mandelker, who was the Undersecretary at the time. To me, having those tools and having the Treasury Secretary help you implement them, there's no cooler or more impactful job in the government.
I think they have the Star Trek dashboard, they see everything, I love it. What's your one advice to anybody who wants to get into crypto compliance today?
I think it's all about tools and training. Really, really lean into the training. And I know that's really hard. The other thing I would say is that people ask me all the time what to read. Obviously listen to your podcast, listen to TRM talks, but read enforcement actions, right?
So much.
They are an absolute signal to what a regulator is doing, and also the tools that they're using that you should really understand. So I'd say read.
Very, very interesting. What's your favorite movie or book about law enforcement that you ever watched or read?
Well, so I was lucky enough to be in a very cool documentary on Netflix recently called The Biggest Heist Ever with my colleague Christian Chesky, which was very, very cool. I love true crime stuff. I'm watching it absolutely all the time. I watched Minority Report recently, and you talk about AI and the future of compliance, right? This idea of being able to predict crime in the future. I've never been like a predictive policing guy, but I think that like I watched it recently, and just this idea of them 20 plus years ago being able to at least have this AI future is pretty extraordinary. So I don't know if my favorite, but like most recent coolest was watching Minority Report.
Pretty visionary on that
wild,
front.
Absolutely wild.
We're in DC right now. DC has been a lot in the news right now, Washington DC recently. What's your favorite thing to do in the city here?
Oh my goodness. So I live here. I love Washington DC. I always put the politics aside. As you know, I'm a runner. We do the TRM Run Club absolutely everywhere. I think DC is one of the best running cities in America. You have the Mount Vernon Trail, you have the Capitol Crescent, you run along the canal in Georgetown. So my favorite thing to do is run all the better when the cherry blossoms are out.
Here we go. And the last question, it was great to have you with us, Henri Redbord, the Global Head of Policy and Global Government Affairs at TRM Labs. Henri, if you could have lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, who would it be?
Alexander Hamilton.
Why is that?
First U.S. Treasury Secretary, and he truly built a new financial system, which is what we're doing together today.
There we go. I love it. Thank you, Henri. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to the podcast. One thing that would really help us, if you like it, follow us, subscribe, and rate the show. That will really help more people discover the show. Henri, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, everyone. Hope you found this episode interesting and insightful. Can I ask you for one little favor? Can you go on my YouTube page and actually subscribe to my YouTube page, Henri Arslanian, or if you're already there, just like this video. That would really propel the algorithm and allow many more people to discover our show. If you're listening to this in a podcast format, I would really love a 5-star rating. Again, that really is a small step for you, but has a massive impact for us content creators. Thank you very much, and I hope you found the show insightful. If you have any suggestions for guests, topics, or any new format that you want me to deliver the content that will make it as interesting, insightful, and educational, please let me know. You know how to reach me via email, via LinkedIn, X, and all the other platforms. Thank you very much, and see you guys soon.